And welcome, Hoosier Nation, to our 154th episode of the Hoosier Sound, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. We're recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on Tuesday evening, August 11th, 2020, where I am your host, Noah Freeman. On the docket for tonight, I got to admit, guys, I was really excited for tonight. Matt was finally back. We got the Big Ten conference only schedule a day after our last podcast last week. So we had to wait a little while to talk about the upcoming schedule, but I was excited to have Matt back on with Nithin. I was excited to talk about some football and predict and talk about the new football schedule and just get excited for the new schedule that would have started in just about 2 to 3 weeks or so. And of course, today on Tuesday, everyone by now has heard that the news has come down that the Big Ten and shortly followed the Pac-12 has officially moved. The word is postponed as of right now. The fall sports, all fall sports, to the spring, back to the spring. So that includes anything from football to soccer to volleyball, all that kind of stuff is pushed back to the spring. But before we get into a more somber episode, Matt, you are back. How has it been? How was your excursion in the wilderness for the last month or so?
Yeah, I was quite literally in the middle of God's country, up in Wyoming. I was working in Yellowstone for the last month, which was a fun getaway, a little bit of a vacation. Got to work for my stay. It was a lot of fun. Exploring the park, exploring Grand Teton, and everything that southern Montana and northern Wyoming has to offer. So it was a lot of fun. Try to stay safe as much as I could. Wear a mask everywhere. Even though they don't have many cases, it's still, you have people traveling from all over the country, and it was just a wonderful experience. But it's so nice to be back, and it would be a little bit better if we had much more fun college sports news to talk about.
Hey, Matt, do you think we could put all of college football in the middle of Wyoming and have them play in a statewide bubble? Do you think we could make that happen?
Yeah, but they'd probably get really tired of the 3.5-hour car rides to the grocery store. So,
oh man, yeah. I mean, look, I don't have nearly as much adventure in my life over the last week or so, but yeah, I mean, I'm excited to dive in here. Look, we got some news earlier today. It wasn't surprising, if you ask me. There was an air of inevitability about all of this, but we're gonna dive in. We're gonna talk about the impact it has on IU. We're not just going to regurgitate the news to all of you guys. I'm sure you've heard of it by now. I'm sure you can read it wherever you want to read it. So can't wait to see where all this podcast goes tonight. Noah, how are you doing today? I know you probably heard about college football getting at least pushed back from the fall earlier. What are your initial thoughts as we dive into it?
Like I said earlier, it's a more sad podcast. It's a somber episode because officially everything has been postponed, and we won't be able to see this Hoosier football team in action, if at all, this year, at least until the spring. And in a typical year, this would be like Hoosier fans would be like, "Oh, that's okay, I guess. Maybe we won't we won't have to suffer a season where they win 2, 3, 4 games, something like that." But this is the kind of season that right away that will impact Indiana specifically the most. We've mentioned this before on multiple podcasts that Indiana is in a rebuilding state. Well, not a rebuilding stage, but a building stage in general, to where the Indiana football program doesn't have the luxury of some of those Michigan State, Penn State, Ohio State, even a lot of those blue blood and even second tier blue blood programs. They don't have the luxury that those programs do in terms of a football team finding success and sustaining that success. A lot of football programs, if they have down years, it's just a couple of years maybe that they might have a down year and they might be out of the top 25. But for Indiana, it's the opposite, where usually they have down years and it's just every once in a while where they have a few up years. And Tom Allen is building a program that was able to be sustained, and this is the kind of hurdle potentially. And again, this is a big potential because nothing's set in stone, but this is a big hurdle potentially that could really set back this program and ultimately potentially completely kill the momentum that Tom Allen has built up with just the way that, depending on how many players, if they end up leaving, and just there's a lot of stuff still left to do, but just the bad news officially came, and it's hard not to. And this is a good episode, a good day to have the episode because it's very fresh reactions. It's hard not to have some pretty sad and negative reactions, at least right away.
Yeah, and I mean, look, the negativity is definitely sort of a natural part of all of it, but there are a lot of questions and honestly not that many answers that come from the Big Ten and the Pac-12's decision to push back college football. Let me,
You're telling me.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, put it this way, right? There are a lot more Indianas out there than Ohio State's, right? A lot of programs in that 5-win, 6-win, 7-win range who, in a given year, we've seen a lot of strangely impressive seasons from Power 5 teams, right? Like we've seen teams like Wake Forest, make BCS bowl games, and who knows who that could have been this year. And then, you mentioned the Tom Allen part. The one of the things I'm more confident about as far as college football and Indiana football is concerned, I'm pretty confident in Tom Allen's ability to sustain Indiana's level of competitiveness and success in the years to come. And again, who knows if we'll be able to kick off in the spring. To be perfectly honest with you, I wouldn't be extremely confident in that happening. Wouldn't strike it down, just wouldn't be extremely confident. But in the years to come, right, Tom Allen signed his extension. He's shown his ability to recruit the state. He's shown an ability to recruit the state of Florida as well. And he's kept Indiana competitive throughout his career at IU. So, just his personality in general, I feel like will help push Indiana going forward. But, the final interesting question I have is, I was listening to ESPN Chicago radio earlier today, and they were talking about how, Joe Burrow, the quarterback from LSU, who ended up going number 1 overall, he had a pretty shaky season at LSU a couple of years ago. And then it was just this past year where he really took off and led LSU to the national title. Who's going to be the Joe Burrow that we don't get to watch this upcoming season, takes a leap to the NFL, and then who knows, completely tears it apart? It's unbelievable to think, what kind of individual storylines we're missing out on. But, again, like I said, a lot more questions really than answers from the news earlier today.
Yeah, and look, I echo everything Nathan said, made some very good points. There's a bigger picture to this as well, which is that IU will be fine. Like, as a athletics program as a whole, IU will be okay. Like, basketball makes a ton of money, football makes a ton of money, men's soccer, women's volleyball, women's basketball, they make money. It's not that you don't find that though at an Akron, right? Like, Akron football carries Akron athletics. You look at Boise State, right? An even bigger group of 5 program that carries not only just Boise State athletics, but Boise State as a university in general. So the football season being canceled for most of the group of 5, being postponed for the Pac-12 and for the Big Ten, and probably will be dominoes falling for the likes of the ACC and the Big 12 and the SEC here in the next upcoming days. We're going to be looking at athletic programs may never look the same as they did in 2018 or in early 2019. We're going to be looking at athletic programs losing sports, being out of sports, going out of the NCAA, going to Division II, Division III, maybe even NAIA for some of their sports, a lot like IU is for hockey. So it's just going to be something that we're going to be dealing with and seeing the effects of for the next probably 10, 15 years in college athletics.
Of course, and Nathan, specifically to what you were talking about with elaborating on my first point, it's just hard not to think of, because Indiana has been in this situation before with a good coach and a successful football program, relative at least to what they typically are, and that wasn't sustained because, of course, Indiana has been up and down throughout their entire existence as a football program, and this is the kind of thing that hopefully it doesn't take a step back, because Tom Allen needs consecutive years of good quality football in order for this to be sustained after him, because that's the thing. Like, I totally agree with you guys. He's going to be fine as a coach, but it's what happens after he leaves, after he gets a much better job, or if he's one of those few coaches that stays, no matter, regardless of how good he is, even he's going to eventually retire at some point. It really makes a difference whether he's having 10 sustained years of success or 4 or 5 compared to just whenever this COVID thing. So hopefully it just doesn't get them a step back, because this whatever next season of football they have, hopefully they didn't lose too many people to where their young guys don't live up to the expectations they just had, which then affects recruiting, and it just stumbles them a year or two for Tom Allen to get back into that success. That was the only major point that I was at least talking about as of that we could potentially see.
Yeah, I mean that's a fair way to say it, and you know, I was a little surprised. Maybe surprised is the wrong word. Maybe I was a little, I guess, impressed to see the social media activity of a number of star players and even Big Ten coaches over the last couple of days. I
Even
mean,
on IU itself.
And you know, in one side we were hearing, hey, look, you know, Big Ten presidents, Big Ten athletic directors are meeting. Odds don't look great for a college football season. Then you were getting head coaches, you know, including Tom Allen, who said we want to play. But there were a couple of other coaches in the conference, specifically Scott Frost at Nebraska, who was very adamant in saying, like, we are going to do whatever it takes to play, even if it means separating from the Big Ten. And I don't have the exact up-to-the-minute developments on this. I don't know if Nebraska's honestly considering a one-year trip to the Big 12.
I wouldn't doubt it. I would think so. I think they're considering it. At least the football program itself is.
I mean, they should be considering it, but I think it'd be pure comedy to watch that defense try to guard Oklahoma, try to defend Oklahoma.
Yeah, I mean, were either of you surprised to see those comments from prominent Big Ten coaches and superstar players like Justin Fields, Ohio State, at Ohio State? Were you surprised that those at the end of the day didn't really convince Big Ten Commissioner Kevin Warren?
No, I'm not surprised at all. I think there's a real it's not just disenfranchisement between the universities themselves and the players themselves. I think there's a large gap between the brain trust of the Big Ten and the NCAA and the players. This has been shown over and over and over and over again by whether it's the NCAA video games, right, being taken away, or it's the players wanting to get paid, or trying to get a players union going, was it UCLA did a couple of years ago. This has been shown over and over and over again in college athletics for the last 10, 15, 20 years. And it's about time the NCAA catches up to it. I know they did Trevor Lawrence started the We Want to Play movement on social media. Hashtag We Want to Play. Hashtag, I know Trump tweeted about it. A bunch of other people tweeted about it. So you know it's a big deal when the president's jumping in about it. But snuck in at the bottom of the picture of the statements that they wanted healthcare coverage, they wanted testing, yada, 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 was we want to have a players union, eventually have a college football players union, which I think is the beginning of the end of what the current NCAA model is. I know I'm talking in large terms this podcast, the two things I've talked about, but this is serious. This is a really important moment for college athletics where the players are finally stepping up and being not just players, because we had smaller groups of players here and there step up. But the people who are at the forefront of college athletics, the stars of college football, are finally using their voices to speak out against what the NCAA has been doing for the last 20 years and stunting the progress that the athletes have been trying to make.
And I think, what's important there is there's no question that right now we're in a transcendental moment. Right. It's not the middle of fall in 2017 or 18 or whenever, UCLA was starting to create a movement on Northwestern. I remember Kane Coulter, when he was a quarterback at Northwestern, he was trying to get something going. At the end of the day, that was just sort of a blip on the radar. We're in the middle of something big here. And like we were saying, when it is your superstar players, maybe it is time for everyone across college sports to really consider where they need to make big changes. We did see, we have seen changes in the image and likeness area. We have seen bigger movements in sort of the transfer rules being less restrictive, And here's the thing, the NCAA might initially scoff at the idea of a players union, but in situations like this, it could really help things like conversation and communication and negotiation. So, hey, maybe if we're having a podcast episode at this time next year, we could be talking about the NCAA Players Union at NCAA PU. Yeah, maybe that'll be a new thing in a year or two from now.
I know it's really hard to get something like that going just because there isn't a specific. It's not like the NFL where they're getting paid, where the NFL went through quite literally this exact same thing about a month ago or so. And literally it was the same thing over social media, where a lot of the players, when they were coming to the end of the time to negotiate things right before training camp was going to start, and all the players were like, hashtag we want to play. I don't think it was that specific one or something like that, because they just weren't able to hash out specific details on how they were going to come back, but the players still wanted to play, even though there weren't official, specific, hashed out ideas on how they were safely going to come back. And like I said, I know it's pretty difficult to kind of get a college athlete players union per se going, just because it's really different how they're not playing for a salary like the NFL players, and it kind of gets dicey, like what leverage do they really have besides just not playing? And then even then, it's like, I feel like out of a 90 100 man plus roster, I feel like it'd be really hard to get the whole country basically to make a statement, when there's a lot of other factors also involved with that. But to what you were talking about, Nathan, that would be a really great idea, because the nation for the nation of college football wants to play football right now. And there were a lot of, like you said, star players in the Big Ten and some in the Pac-12 that officially canceled or postponed today that said, yeah, we want to play today. And it's going to be sad. And for all the other factors, there's a lot of different rabbit holes that we could go down with this, but it's just pretty sad to see, at least for that aspect. I do think, as I'm finishing my long-winded speech, I do think at the end of the day, it was probably the right choice, but there's just a lot of other factors that make it like, that make us have this episode to where we can talk about it and really question a lot of the decision-making or some stuff that's gone on.
And I mean, we were talking about the president tweeting about the movement. It's because college football is a big deal. I mean, that's really what it is. And I know people say, well, football is king. They say football is king in the United States, but really it's the NFL, and then it's college football, like neck and neck, and then everything else below that. Really, those two are the two biggest sports in the United States. And really, spare a thought for some of the people who are like, stadium custodians or concession stand workers or ticket booth employees. Those are the people who really get crushed by this. I was listening to Charles Barkley earlier today, of all people, the TNT NBA studio analyst. He was on ESPN 1000 in Chicago, and he went to Auburn before he had an illustrated successful NBA career. And he was saying, like, college football, I mean, I don't know what his source was. So, don't take what I say, exactly correctly. But he was saying something like 75% of just sort of the the gross economic revenue that Auburn gets is from football season, because not only, it's one of those things where even if you didn't have fans at the games, you would still have people wearing their masks and hopefully social distancing. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt, at bars on Auburn, or people talking about the games on social media, or Auburn getting their broadcast revenue and TV contract. And that's where, I wanted to bring up this next question for you guys. There are a couple of, well, and Rob, our good friend, he's talking about how, local bars and restaurants make money as well. There's a lot of economic influence that college football has. But the question I have is, there are still a couple of Power 5 conferences that haven't committed yet, right? We've got the SEC, we've got the Big 12, we've got the ACC as well. How confident, do you think there's any way that those 3 conferences make something happen this fall? Matt, maybe I'll start with you. Do you think there's any shot they're able to do something?
First, I want to add, Nathan, to your point with just the like you said, the stadium workers and all that. It's like you may think of, if the spring football does happen, like they can still get their revenue that way, and it doesn't quite work that way specifically, because if a lot of these people are trying to make even somewhat of a living, depending on what they specifically do, because obviously you can have, this can be a part-time job or it can be a full-time job, depending if you like work at the stadium itself, but a lot of these people that do all of the seasonal things, they've got football in the fall where they do their seasonal things, and that's what they have planned every year. And they've got something different planned in the spring, obviously, because football doesn't happen. And now that's completely changed things, and they don't have a source of income during the fall for some of these people. So, just echoing your thing. But, Matt, continue, because I'm going to say, eventually I'm going to say no, like you just said.
Yeah, I look, and I'll add one more thing to this conversation. It's a little bit long-winded, but I know a friend of the show, Joel Wander, he had a car service company that just went down the drain thanks to coronavirus. So sorry, Joel, condolences, Joel. And then at the same time, Opie Taylor's in Bloomington also went under as well. So it's already starting in Bloomington, and football isn't even the biggest draw when it comes to IU sports. So
it wouldn't have even started yet, even if it was happening.
But anyways,
you're saying,
back to Nathan's question, which was, do I think the other 3 Power 5 conferences can figure something out for football? And the answer is absolutely unequivocally no. There's a 0% chance that 3 people, and that's the 3 commissioners of the Big 12, the ACC, and the SEC, are going to be able to agree on anything, let alone when or how the season should take place with one another. And then that's, barring any potential outbreak, how they're going to handle that. Because as you've seen, they've really handled the whole let's have a season thing extremely well. Definitely planned ahead for everything that could possibly have happened. Not doing anything at the last minute at all. So, no, I have no belief in anybody that the NCAA has any plan whatsoever to deal with this, and I don't think they're going to be able to pull it off, and I don't think we're going to have any college football this fall, which is depressing, but honestly the truth.
I'm going to play devil's advocate, whether I believe it or not. It's fun to play devil's advocate.
Okay.
This was another point that I was going to eventually bring up at some point on this podcast, which is a major problem the NCAA football in the NCAA has, is that this is where it's really coming to bite them in the butt, where how all of there's not one cohesive person that's running NCAA football like there's not an NCAA commissioner like there is in a lot of other college programs, college sports, and obviously all of the professional sports, where all of this happens together. And this is where you get the Big Ten and the Pac-12 saying, sorry, see you later, guys. And then you've got those 3 other conferences that, Matt, to play devil's advocate, I don't think they all need to come up with something together. If the SEC wants to power through, which I totally wouldn't be shocked, actually. I don't think it necessarily would happen, but I wouldn't be shocked if the SEC was still playing football when everyone else stopped, because, hey, everyone would be watching the SEC. They'd be the only ones on there, and they are the conference that wants to power through this, just like the MLB is. Darned if anyone's games are getting canceled because people are contracting the virus, they're going to power through. So just to play devil's advocate, I don't think they all have to come up with something that they can actually just do what they want, because of the poor NCAA model that is starting to rear its ugly head.
Yeah, the difference between the MLB and college football, though, is the minute that the star linebacker for the Crimson Tide gets the coronavirus is the minute that Nick Saban is saying they should cancel the season, and that is the minute that everything goes, all crap hits the fan. All right. So, like, this is what we're waiting for. We're waiting for one player, one star player on any of the SEC teams or the ACC teams. Like, if Trevor Lawrence, who we want to play movement founder, right? If he contracts coronavirus, you think Clemson wants to play the next game? No, absolutely not. They can't play the next game. They can't play without Trevor Lawrence. So the Marlins are doing well without all of their starters, which is just absurd and a one-off thing. But that's besides the point. We're looking at unprecedented, unparalleled just trip-ups and possibly traps for these plans. And then you're going to need steel-proof, bulletproof plans in order to stop whatever misfit, crazy, unequivocally just annoying possible circumstances they could have. I'm just throwing all the adjectives I know of.
Well, unless you just want to be like the MLB and it's like, hey, it hasn't happened yet, so I mean, we're just going to still keep doing it because we just are going to roll the dice and it hasn't happened yet with a big program.
But, you know, it's funny, we joke about it, but there are some inherent differences with Major League Baseball, right, compared to college football. First and foremost, it's the pros versus the amateurs, and the reason that's important is because you know, in case all of you are wondering, right? Maybe I'm not covering all of it correctly, but in general, like, it's their job, right? It's their job. It's what they're spending 100% of their time on. Major League Baseball covers them with insurance and benefits and legal and marketing and all that sort of stuff. They get paid a salary to play the game of baseball professionally. So that's why it's different with the pros compared to amateur. And then the other part of it is baseball legitimately is a naturally socially distanced activity, right? I mean, you're not talking about players really crashing and colliding into each other. You know, I know if there's a runner on first base, well, he and the first baseman might be a little bit close. The hitter and the catcher are a little bit close.
As much as you can be for a team sport.
You know, exactly. So overall, when you consider that, it's very different than college football. And even with the two teams in Major League Baseball, the Marlins and the Cardinals, you know, there I don't think has been any official confirmation on this. I know Cleveland's had a couple of guys to break protocol, but really it's not incidents where the virus is being spread in the activity, in the sport itself. It's being spread because people are going outside and doing whatever they want to do. So even on that, right, we joke about baseball because baseball is pushing through it. But even on that, it's like there are some pretty stark differences. You're not dealing with amateurs who are 18 to 22-year-old people. And I don't know about you, but, you know, that's not the most trustworthy age group. I hope the sarcasm is coming through clearly when all of you are listening to this.
I mean, actually, that is a fair statement. I mean, look at it. And we just take another point of view on this issue, which is that all these athletes are going back to school, right? They are student athletes, correct? So they are going to be in classrooms with their classmates, whether it's socially distanced or not, or they're going to be on campus taking it online. And then you're withholding them from the classroom, but they have to go to practices. So answer me this question. Are they students or are they athletes? Because, like, what are they going to school to do? Because if they're going to school, but they aren't allowed to go to their classes because they have to be quarantined so that they can play football, then they're athletes, right? Because they're there on campus to play a sport and they're being withheld from their academic duties by having to do it online because athletics comes first. Or are they going to class and then, oops, one of them gets coronavirus. I guess they can't play on the big football game this weekend. That makes the university a lot of, and the conference a lot of money in television rights. Which one is going to take precedent? And the answer is going to be almost always, in any case, football.
Well, to be fair, if I were a football player, if I were a Trevor Lawrence on one of these collegiate programs, I, as a student and as a player, as both of them, yeah, and even if I know a lot of the athletes really obviously try and put football first before some of the athlete or the school stuff, but I would, especially even if there was a university that they were still in class. Of course, all of the classes would still. I would doubt any university across the country isn't doing some sort of social distance. If their class is in person, that they're not sitting 6 feet apart, masks on the whole time, that kind of stuff. As an athlete, I would do my best to avoid everyone, keep the mask on, stay 6 feet apart to where I wouldn't interact with someone. And it would be like, I guess now, typical every day for a lot of us. And then I would want to go play football because I would trust my other teammates that they were doing the same thing and they were trying to be as safe as possible. So in their defense, I feel like that's kind of what they would look like it as. And I would want to play instead of like, and I would still be okay going to all the classes and I would still want to play, understanding all the risks.
And I understand, sorry, Nathan, but I understand that sentiment that they want to play and they want to walk around with masks on, right? Like, I get that, and that the university can try to do everything that in their power to like keep everybody safe and at a social distance. But look, there's 100 players, right, on the football team, and then there's managers, and then there's coaches, and then there's the families of the coaches, and then the families of the players. There's a lot of people. At the end of the day, it ends up being thousands of people you're trying to keep track of to make sure that everybody is safe and doing the right things. That is a lot of variables for something not to go wrong, even if everybody's doing it right. That everybody could be trying their hardest to wear a mask and whatnot. You can still get this virus because it's so contagious. So that's the issue we're working with here. And there's a lot of things that we could talk about. We could go on for hours about this, and I'm sure Nathan has something to add to this.
Well, and just to wrap that up, I mean, one of the most common questions we're seeing on social media, digging through with Indiana HQ or just tracking the various hashtags or whatever on Twitter. One of the questions that you see a lot of people who oppose the Big Ten and the Pac-12 decision from earlier today, that question is, hey, you're having these students on campus and taking classes. Why can't they play football? And I think that's what you guys were getting at briefly there. But to summarize it, like with school, if you've got somebody who's infected and you find out through school testing that they're infected, you can immediately tell them to stay at home and take the class virtually, because a lot of these instances, classes are being held in a hybrid fashion. You can't do that with football. You can't tell Trevor Lawrence to go quarterback from home. I don't care how advanced video games are nowadays. You still can't play actual football on your Xbox or your PlayStation. So, that's where it's really, really different. And in the classroom setting, the social distancing is a lot more controllable compared to football, where literally every single play, you've got 22 guys that are involuntarily coming together. And that's where there's a big line in the sand. So, lots to dig into. We're still rolling on here, but we haven't heard the last of this, to say the least.
No, and hey, now I'm gonna go back to school this for the next couple of years while I work to get my master's. And as you guys have remembered, if you're longtime listeners, I'm a music guy, so I'm gonna be playing in concert band ensembles. They already have a plan, so like, hey, I'm sitting there doing all the work, and I just, at the end of the day, my point is that I feel like with all of this entire issue in general, I feel like there's just becoming more of a barrier, more of a no man's land or a line in the sand, whatever you want to call it, between people that are like, I feel okay if I were to contract this, and I feel like we can go about everyday lives more normally, not completely normal, but at least more normally. And there's still the other side that, not that it's the end of the world that if something happens, like if someone contracts it, but that it is a bigger issue. And there are points to both of it that we can get into in a second, but I do want to pause, and I do want to talk about some more positive news, because we always like to put this segment in for a lot of this issue. If we do have an episode where the men's basketball team has a really bad game and we're talking about a really bad loss, we've got a positive aspect. And Nathan, give us our positive aspect this week, and who won the week this week for IU sports.
The NBA bubble is still rolling on, and it's been really interesting to see a number of different players and teams step up that you may not have anticipated early on. Guys like Michael Porter Jr. with Denver, for example. But from an IU perspective, Thomas Bryant and Victor Oladipo keep putting up numbers. And Bryant had a couple more double-digit games over the course of the last week. Victor Oladipo is consistently putting up double figures as the Pacers are trending towards the playoffs. They're in the playoffs. We're going to see who their matchup is coming up as
lost to the Heat last
night. They did. You're right, Matt. They did. A little setback for Indiana last night, but
and if you heard the slight positive reaction in Matt's voice right now, Matt is the enemy in terms of Pacers fans. Remember, he's a Heat fan because he's down from Florida, so he was not trying to be sarcastic. He was genuinely happy that the Pacers just lost, contrary to most of the listeners.
Well, on that note, it looks like the Pacers and the Heat could very well be a first-round matchup starting next week. So we're gonna keep track of that. But as far as who won the week, yeah, Thomas Bryant, Victor Oladipo continuing to put up good numbers.
And that's really cool to hear. Just kind of going off of our podcast that we did last week, Nathan, with just kind of because last week was the first time we really had a long amount of time to see some of these players. And there was an ESPN article, and take what you will with ESPN articles. I like some of them, but some of them are another story. But there was an article that they put out of 10. So basically, it was 10 surprising players in the bubble, and there was it was two Wizards players. That's what I was thinking of. But one of them was Thomas Bryant, was a surprising player in the entire NBA bubble that was just really nailing it. Since we've got these this podcast is, as you can tell, there's not as typical of an outline for us. We just kind of wanted to talk and kind of either, whether it's venting or just talk about points, we just kind of wanted to talk about and have a fresh take for tonight's podcast, since we don't have natural stopping points. Matt, since we're at a natural stopping point, you want to talk about your social media shout out or something that you have with social media this week?
Yeah, it was really tough to find a social media shout out this week because, well, one, there's not a lot of IU sports stuff going on and like on the field stuff. And then two, every bit of news has been depressing. So I don't really want to shout that out. But we did find one, and that is over at WISH TV. They shouted out Ashawn Riggins. Ashawn Riggins, again, is a former IU football player. And his battle with mental health and how he attempted suicide in 2018, came back from it, and is now pursuing to be a sports psychologist. And it's a really cool story. And Olivia Ray from Wish, so that's Olivia Olivia. Wow, I forgot English. Ray WISH on Twitter. Or Olivia Ray. I know. Shush. Olivia Ray on Twitter tweeted out the video. So if you guys want to go watch it and his interview, it's like 2 minutes long. It's on Twitter, so go check that out. Also, go check us out on Twitter and Instagram at Indiana HQ. Well, we can't do the Hoosier sound, but
yeah, I would. And that's another that I could get very upset with. Like, there are some platforms that just are naturally like a necessary evil at some points, and like YouTube is one of those, and we don't have problems yet with that, but Twitter is at some points a necessary evil. And just, man, you can't even imagine my frustration with Twitter right now and how they are not helping us whatsoever with this. And honestly, we really don't like to beg on this podcast, but if you could go at Twitter support and say, hey, please fix and help look at the Hoosier Sound, because right now with all of the Twitter stuff, the mess that they've had recently with all of the suspensions, the involuntary hacks and everything, they haven't gotten to look at our podcast yet, no matter what I've tried to do, because of course Twitter's so big that they don't have a lot of ways to contact them. And right now, the only thing I can think of that they haven't done yet is to literally just at their support. Maybe if enough of us do that, that'd be great. And just put at the Hoosier Sound. We would really love and appreciate that. But the most difficult part of today is, as a podcaster, you've got a full year of podcast planning. And of course, the one downtime is basically April to beginning to middle of August, because usually we get the basketball schedule coming out in the middle of August, and then we can talk about the upcoming games. So that's a good April, May, June. That's a good 4-ish months that we've got to figure out content. And now we have to go another September, October, November, to at least another 4 months probably. I'm gonna wager saying basketball is gonna be pushed back at least to start. But nevertheless, it's still 2 to 3 more months of us having to figure out topics to do because there is no specific current events. And also for that, before we talk about that, I just apologize in advance because the topics are going to start to run dry. We're going to do our best to give you something interesting to listen to every week.
I mean, yeah, go ahead. Okay, so I don't have anything insightful to say there. As much as we might just do like a stand-up comedy. We might have I don't know. We might have some other crazy ideas. I don't know. It's gonna be well. I guess we got some pro stuff to talk about, right? I mean, it looks like because of some of the nuances we discussed earlier, it's a little bit easier to execute pro sports than it is to execute an amateur sport. So we've got the NBA going. The NHL has a 5 overtime game going on right now, which is historically ridiculous. They pushed back the start time for a night playoff game tonight to tomorrow morning because again 5 overtimes. And so the NFL, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a betting man, but I think they're going to be able to pull it off. So we'll have that stuff to talk about, I think.
We'll figure it out at some point. Hey, if you've got ideas, honestly, hit us up at right now Indiana HQ Twitter. Hit us up, DM us or something. We have those messages on. Hey, if you've got ideas and of stuff to talk about, we'd welcome all those ideas for the next few months. But yeah, we'll try and keep it as current as possible. We've got a bunch of other things to hopefully try and talk about. But overall, since there's a lot of different ways that we can go and there's a lot of different feels for just all of this, is there any final points that you guys want to get off your chest or talk about with as just kind of feeling the way that the football season is being postponed currently?
Yeah, I just think that my general feeling comes down to one main issue, and that's a lack of communication between the conferences and the NCAA. I think if there had been better communication, they might have had a better shot at making a plan. I still have maybe close to zero faith that they would have had a plan in place, but at least they would have been talking about one. And I think I've seen it on social media a couple times. I think I've heard a couple of podcasts talk about it, but having a college football commissioner would be a really good idea. Somebody that isn't Mark Emmert, that is in charge of not just the Power 5 conferences, but the Group of 5, and the logistics that go into that. If the folks at the NCAA want to handle the business side, that's cool. But this person would be in charge of mostly not only just the players, but also the coaches, the trainers, the managers, and everybody involved in college football, and would be a go-between between the conferences and the NCAA.
Yeah, and then for me, when it's all said and done, regardless of how great the planning might have hypothetically been, there are just so many challenges when you're dealing with college football. If those of you go back and listen to our coronavirus in sports podcast from probably 6 to 8-ish weeks ago at this point, I was very skeptical about college football going off in the fall, just because you're dealing with so much. You're dealing with amateurism. You're dealing with the game of football, which is all about crashing and colliding. You're dealing with all sorts of inherently challenging issues. So to me, like I said at the start, there was an air of inevitability about it. And once again, spare a thought for those people whose livelihoods are attached to the game, not the millionaire coaches like Scott Frost or Jim Harbaugh, but more for the people who really do need the game of college football for their livelihoods. And also, just to wrap my part up, the student athletes who play other fall sports, the non-football players, because the volleyball players, the soccer teams, cross country, they're pretty much at the pinnacle moment of their sports career right now. There's really not a major next level for them to go to, and they've attached their childhood and teenage years and high school years and all that to that sport, and now all of a sudden their their student athlete careers are being thrown into turbulence. So just think, the superstar players and coaches that in football, they'll be okay. Just think about those other people.
I would say, even adding on to, you're talking about a lot of the other sports, which even if the best of the best do go on to that next level, uh, you've got the majority of those, and then Nathan, the majority of college football players, period, don't go on to the NFL anyway. And this is basically the end of what they're doing, and the end of this high level of the sport that they're playing, because it's just so competitive at the next level. Even with the NFL, even if you've got a team like Ohio State or LSU this past year, even if you get as many as 20 people from one class going on, think of that as a team with like 100 people on it, and that's just one school, and that's obviously a very rare case. That's not a lot of people in the grand scheme of things that are going on to the next level. So just to add on to that as well. But the last thing that I think I did want to touch on is we did kind of gloss over why this all happened so fast, because last Wednesday, like we said, the day our podcast was released to most people, the Big Ten schedule came out, and I really was looking forward to talking about that. But a lot of the 5 to 6 days of since this kind of started happening over the weekend, the 5 to 6 day turnaround, where it's the Big Ten gave out their new schedule and then everything's postponed. The big reason that, from at least what we've heard, we haven't been in the multiple meetings, and they have been multiple meetings that they've had over the past 3 to 4 days, is there has been more research and more evidence of it's a very, very rare is that a correct word for it? It's a viral infection, the myocarditis, where it has been, you can find it, a lot of these people can get it through like the common cold or H1N1. People are saying, but it's very rare, but they're finding that COVID is one of those viral infections that can bring this on, which it basically weakens the heart at a case, and it could lead to heart failure or cardiac arrest, that kind of abnormal heartbeat, sudden, like a bunch of heart related incidents. And that's the case that has, from what we have heard and understood, tipped over kind of what the Big Ten and the Pac-12 were really having, these maybe not emergency meetings, but pretty quick and sudden meetings compared to where we were 1 week ago from today.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I don't know if Brady Feeney, the IU freshman lineman, was officially diagnosed with that, but it's these are the long-term effects that young adults are going to deal with if they get hit with a positive coronavirus test, if they do get diagnosed with having the illness. It's not just you're symptomatic or asymptomatic. It's not just you live or you die. There's a lot of middle ground there that, like you said, Noah, triggered these meetings, made Kevin Warren, the Big Ten commissioner, decide right away. There's a lot of uncertainty with the virus still. It's enigmatic. People don't have all the answers right now. So until we get some more clarity, we've got a table football season.
Yep, and that's where we find ourselves now. And I don't think this discussion is going to officially end. I sincerely think these other conferences, well, I didn't necessarily think that they would cancel today, last week, but I would think that these other three conferences, like they did before, even though the ACC was mentioned like a month and a half ago, they were mentioned when the Big Ten did all of this stuff. They were mentioned to be linked with all of that, but they didn't say anything for a while. So I wouldn't be surprised if the other three conferences, it took them a couple weeks or so to really, if they were to cancel things, it would take them a couple weeks to get that out. So I don't think this is a process that is done, we're probably going to talk about it, even though for IU it is probably wrapped up. But it will be fun to mention if Nebraska is successful in breaking away from the Big Ten for a year, and they're just going to throw out Notre Dame's name. It's like, hey, Notre Dame's in the ACC for a year. It's going to work. But so this is not done, and we're going to talk about other things and more basketball things, since that at least is staying steady and staying the course. Maybe the basketball schedule, or at least some of it, will come out here within the next few weeks like it typically does. But for at least today, that's going to wrap it up for our 154th show of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you all so much for joining us. And always, of course, we had a bunch of people today in the live audience for coming and participating in the chat section. Really appreciate your support. And we really like to hear your thoughts and comments, because it really stimulates and grows this conversation that we have, because that's what it is. We're just three guys having a conversation, and it's great to bring you guys in with this conversation. But news and updates, as you guys have heard, it would be great if you could help us with this Twitter support. I feel like the more people, maybe someone will say, hey, maybe we should just flip on the switch. That's all we want. We just want us to be flipped on the switch. We don't need you to like give us more followers or something. Just flip on the switch. But subscribe to our show. YouTube is really the best way too. Getting that up is really big for us as well. But most importantly, if you enjoy our show, leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or Facebook really helps. But also, more importantly, telling a friend, sharing our links is really how we can grow this podcast the most successful way, so we can reach all those passionate IU fans such as yourself. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we'll see you next time.